They said he was blessed by the gods. They were wrong. In the ancient halls of a forgotten kingdom, a boy was born whose body could not feel pain, not the cut of a blade, not the burn of a flame. The court called it a miracle. The priests called it divine proof. But behind the marble walls of the palace, whispers carried a different name. Cursed. As years passed, the prince's laughter echoed in empty corridors while physicians cut and bled him in the name of royal science. Pain was meant to teach mercy, limit cruelty, define humanity. Yet this boy, untouched by agony, grew to see life as a game of experiments, and people as playthings. Historians buried his tale under centuries of dust, but fragments remain, sketches of strange instruments, sealed letters written in trembling, hands and a single phrase carved into stone. He could not feel pain, and so he made others feel it for him. Tonight, we reopen the vault of a dynasty that tampered with nature itself. Tonight, we uncover the truth behind one of history's darkest secrets. Chapter 1. The world before the fall, before the curse, before the madness, there was a kingdom of light, a realm of towering citadels, golden temples, and white banners that glimmered beneath an endless sun. It was said that the gods themselves walked among the people, that their blessings flowed through marble fountains, and that pain, suffering, and death were but tests of divine favor. This was the era of radiant rule, an age where beauty masked rot, and faith served as the perfect disguise for fear. The royal family stood at the pinnacle of this order, the house of Varathane. They claimed descent from a sun deity whose blood, they said, glowed with eternal life. The priests upheld this illusion, preaching that the body was the vessel of the divine. To feel pain was to feel the gods shaping one's soul. But the nobles had grown arrogant, rich beyond comprehension, drunk on faith, and obsessed with transcendence. Pain, to them, was a flaw of lesser men. They built temples not for worship, but for control. Behind the palace gates, the scholars of Varathane conducted forbidden studies, dissecting beggars, torturing heretics, and experimenting with what they called divine thresholds. How much agony could the human body endure before it broke? And what if it never broke at all? Their laboratories were hidden beneath cathedrals, rooms of cold brass, glinting steel, and red wax. There men in robes spoke softly, while screams were silenced by stone walls. Each experiment was blessed by the crown, sanctioned by the high oracle, and hidden beneath the veil of holy enlightenment. The people worshipped their rulers, blind to the suffering that sustained their peace. But among the whispers of servants and the confessions of dying priests, rumors began to spread of a prophecy foretelling a child born without the mark of pain, who would bring both salvation and ruin. When Queen Ilara of Varathan conceived her first child, the entire kingdom celebrated. The stars aligned, the crops flourished, and even the air felt gentler. The priests declared it a sign of divine rebirth. But the queen's pregnancy was not without shadows. Her dreams grew dark, filled with visions of glass needles and crimson pools. On the night before the birth, a storm rolled over the palace. Lightning struck the cathedral spire, splitting its cross in half. The high priest called it a warning. The king dismissed him, saying the gods test only the faithful. That was the world before the fall, gilded, sacred, and hollow. a realm built on faith so blinding it refused to see the abyss beneath its own feet. The kingdom of Varathane stood, proud on its mountain, but the cracks were already there, in its temples, in its people, and soon in its bloodline. A new dawn was coming, but it would not bring light. It would bring silence. Chapter 2. The birth of the curse, the storm, did not end with dawn. It lingered, coiling around the palace like a living thing, whispering, watching. When Queen Ilara's cries filled the air, thunder answered. Servants knelt in fear as midwives worked in frantic silence, their hands trembling under candlelight. That the birth lasted 12 hours, and when it ended, the room fell still. The queen, pale and shaking, clutched a newborn child whose eyes were as silver as moonlight, unblinking, cold, and eerily calm. The royal physicians waited for the infant's first cry. It never came. They pricked his heel. No sound. They struck his thigh with a slender reed. Nothing. And when the needle pierced deeper, the child only stared, his gaze quiet, ancient, and impossibly still. The attendants crossed themselves, muttering prayers. One whispered, "He feels nothing." Another dropped the needle and fled, but King Eric saw only prophecy fulfilled. He lifted the boy before the trembling court and proclaimed, "Behold, the heir to Varathane, proof that we have conquered pain itself." The priests named him Prince Cailan, the child of purity. They said he was born beyond mortal weakness, his flesh untouched by the corruption of suffering. The temples rang with hymns, and the streets filled with firelight. People knelt as golden bells announced the arrival of the God-touched prince. But in the queen's chambers, shadows lengthened. Ilara watched her child as he slept, perfectly still, his chest rising and falling like clockwork. She noticed small bruises on his arms where the doctors had tested his resilience. No flinch, no tears, no pain dot as he grew. His strangeness deepened. At 5, he fell from a marble staircase, his head striking the stone. Blood poured down his temple, yet he smiled, curious at the red staining his hands. When a physician tried to stitch the wound, Cailan simply watched, fascinated by the thread pulling through his flesh. By 7, he had begun to test himself. He placed his palm over candle flames. He walked barefoot across shards of glass. When the servant screamed, he only tilted his head. "It doesn't hurt," he would whisper, as though confused why they were afraid. The queen begged the king to stop the experiments, but the scholars insisted they were witnessing divine perfection. The boy's body healed faster than most. He slept rarely, hungered little. Every injury became another revelation, yet something within him changed, a quiet cruelty, born not from anger but from absence. Without pain, Cailan could not understand it in others. When his tutor once struck him for insolence, the prince broke the man's fingers with eerie calm, saying, "Now you will learn what I cannot." The kingdom still adored him. Statues were raised in his image. The priests declared him living proof that mankind could ascend beyond suffering. But those who served him whispered other words in secret: monster, experiment, curse. One night, Queen Ilara crept into his chamber. Moonlight fell upon his pale face as he slept expressionless. She touched his cheek, whispering, "You were never meant to be this." Her tears fell on his hand, and for the first time he stirred, eyes opening slowly.
"Mother," he said softly, "why do you hurt when I do not?" Ilara had no answer, only silence. That night she ordered the royal physician to halt all experiments. By morning, the physician was found dead, his throat cut with surgical precision. The child's handprints were found in the blood. Chapter 3. Secrets. Beneath the Throne. By the time Prince Kaelin reached 12, the palace had grown quieter, not from peace but from fear. Servants spoke in whispers. Doors were locked earlier. The laughter of children had vanished from the courtyards. Something in the air had changed, heavy with unspoken dread. The king called it progress. The priest called it proof of divine favor. But those who served in the inner chambers, they called it the experiments. In the deepest levels of the palace, beneath mosaics of saints and marble saints, corridors twisted into hidden chambers, the sanctum of purity. There the scholars of Verathane recorded each cut, each trial, each test performed upon their unfeeling prince. They were men who believed pain was a language, and Kaelin was the first fluent speaker. Every night Kaelin was brought before gleaming tables and candlelit diagrams. He obeyed without hesitation. He would lie still as blades pressed against his skin, watching with detached fascination. "Do you feel anything?" they would ask. "Only curiosity," he would answer. Queen Alara no longer appeared at these sessions. Her protest had been silenced, her attendants dismissed, her chambers guarded by priests loyal only to the king. Yet rumors spread that her once golden hair had turned white overnight, and that she prayed not for her son's safety but for his soul. One evening, a foreign scholar named Dr. Ilias Thorn arrived at court, a man of science from beyond the western deserts. Known for his studies on the limits of human sensation, the king welcomed him as an advisor, granting him access to the sanctum. What Thorn found there disturbed even him. The boy's flesh bore hundreds of fine scars. His eyes, though calm, carried a strange hunger, not for power or pleasure but for understanding. "Your Majesty," Thorn warned quietly, "pain is not a flaw. It is the thread that holds the mind to its humanity. If he cannot feel it, he may not know what it means to stop." The king dismissed him. "Then teach him the rest," he ordered coldly. Weeks later, the experiments changed. They were no longer about endurance but infliction. Kaelin was made to observe others in pain, prisoners, condemned thieves, traitors. He studied their faces, their screams, their tears. Slowly, his fascination deepened into something darker. "I want to know," he told Thorn one night, "what they feel when they beg." Thorn hesitated. "Some doors, my prince, are not meant to be opened." Kaelin's reply was soft, almost childlike. "Then why did you build the key?" That night Thorn disappeared. His quarters were found empty, his notes burned, his instruments sealed away in the royal vault. Only a single entry from his journal survived, smuggled out by a terrified scribe. The boy smiles when others scream. It is not malice, it is study. He watches pain as one would a sunrise. I fear we have created not a god but a mirror without reflection. The next morning the king announced a new decree. The sanctum would expand. More subjects were needed. The temples praised his wisdom. The people celebrated another step toward divine perfection. But beneath the palace, where blood mixed with incense and silence, something stirred, not holy, not human, but born from the same ambition that once made gods fall. The prince had learned everything but empathy. And now, he wanted to teach the world what he could not feel. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Dynasty. Decline of Verathane began not with war or rebellion, but with a scream that no one dared admit hearing. It came from the lower halls of the palace, one night when the wind was still and the moon glowed like a pale wound in the sky. Servants claimed it echoed through the marble floors up into the spires, into the very heart of the king's chamber. Others swore it came from the prince himself, though he had never screamed in his life. By then Kaelin was 17. His beauty was almost unnatural. Pale as bone, calm as glass, eyes like liquid silver that saw everything but felt nothing. The kingdom adored his composure, his precision, his divine restraint. But within the palace, people vanished, tutors, guards, chambermaids, their names erased from records, their bodies never found. The experiments had stopped being science. They had become ritual. In the deepest vault where no priest dared enter, Kaelin conducted his own studies. He had learned how the body reacted to fear, How a heartbeat trembled before a blade, how breath stuttered before mercy. To him it was knowledge. To others it was horror. Queen Alara was found wandering the eastern gardens, barefoot and silent, her mind fractured. "He's not my son," she whispered to the flowers. "He's what we made when we asked the gods to leave us." The king hid her away, blaming illness. But guilt haunted him. In his nightmares, he saw the boy's cold eyes watching, studying, waiting. When famine struck the outer villages that winter, the people turned desperate. They begged for aid. The priest instead declared it divine testing. The king doubled the taxes to fund further purification. And when riots broke out, Calin asked his father, "Should I end their suffering?" He meant it literally. That night, torches lit the streets, and not in rebellion, but in ritual fire. Calin descended into the city, dressed in white, accompanied by silent guards. The crowd gathered, believing he had come to bless them. But what they saw instead was a young man smiling as the flames reflected in his eyes, unmoved by screams, untouched by chaos. By morning, the riots had ceased. The city was silent once more, but the stench of burnt flesh hung in the air for weeks. Whispers spread. The god without pain had become the angel of suffering. The king's advisors urged him to stop the madness, to end the experiments and exile his son. But Calin had already taken command of the sanctum, and the guards no longer obeyed anyone else. He turned the laboratories into a temple, proclaiming a new doctrine. Pain is illusion. To destroy it, one must embrace it. The people watched as nobles and scholars were brought before him, their devotion tested through trials of endurance. Those who survived were hailed as enlightened. Those who didn't were called sacrifices. When the high priest objected, Calin touched his chest and whispered, "Do you feel the beating of your heart? That is your weakness." He drove a blade through it slowly, with surgical precision. The kingdom trembled. At last, King Arik, broken by grief, attempted one final act, and he led his royal guard to destroy the sanctum. But Calin was waiting. In the chamber of mirrors, father and son faced each other. "You were supposed to be divine," the king whispered. Calin smiled faintly. "You asked the gods to take my pain. They obeyed." When dawn rose, the palace was aflame. The golden banners burned, the towers collapsed, and the mountain kingdom of Varathani became a silhouette against the morning sky. No bodies were recovered. Only a single inscription carved into the ruins of the throne room remained. "He who cannot feel pain cannot fear the end." And so ended the house of Varathani, not with conquest, but with its own creation, a dynasty that sought to conquer pain, destroyed by its absence. In the deepest vault where no priest dared enter, Calin conducted his own studies. He had learned how the body reacted to fear, how a heartbeat trembled before a blade, how breath stuttered before mercy. To him it was knowledge. To others it was horror. Queen Alara was found wandering the eastern gardens, barefoot and silent, her mind fractured. "He's not my son," she whispered to the flowers. "He's what we made when we asked the gods to leave us." The king hid her away, blaming illness. But guilt haunted him. In his nightmares, he saw the boy's cold eyes watching, studying, waiting. When famine struck the outer villages that winter, the people turned desperate. They begged for aid. The priests instead declared it divine testing. The king doubled the taxes to fund further purification. And when riots broke out, Calin asked his father, "Should I end their suffering?" He meant it literally. That night, torches lit the streets, not in rebellion but in ritual fire. Calin descended into the city, dressed in white, accompanied by silent guards. The crowd gathered, believing he had come to bless them. But what they saw instead was a young man smiling as the flames reflected in his eyes, unmoved by screams, untouched by chaos. By morning, the riots had ceased. The city was silent once more, but the stench of burnt flesh hung in the air for weeks. Whispers spread. The god without pain had become the angel of suffering. The king's advisors urged him to stop the madness, to end the experiments and exile his son. But Calin had already taken command of the sanctum, and the guards no longer obeyed anyone else. He turned the laboratories into a temple, proclaiming a new doctrine. Pain is illusion. To destroy it, one must embrace it. The people watched as nobles and scholars were brought before him, their devotion tested through trials of endurance. Those who survived were hailed as enlightened. Those who didn't were called sacrifices. When the high priest objected, Cailan touched his chest and whispered, "Do you feel the beating of your heart? That is your weakness." He drove a blade through it slowly, with surgical precision. The kingdom trembled. At last, King Arik, broken by grief, attempted one final act. He led his royal guard to destroy the sanctum. But Cailan was waiting. In the chamber of mirrors, father and son faced each other. "You were supposed to be divine," the king whispered. Cailan smiled faintly. "You asked the gods to take my pain." They obeyed. When dawn rose, the palace was aflame. The golden banners burned, the towers collapsed, and the mountain kingdom of Verathane became a silhouette against the morning sky. No bodies were recovered. Only a single inscription carved into the ruins of the throne room remained. "He who cannot feel pain cannot fear the end." And so ended the house of Verathane, not with conquest, but with its own creation, a dynasty that sought to conquer pain, destroyed by its absence. Chapter 5, The Forgotten Legacy. Centuries passed. The kingdom of Verathane faded into legend, its marble cities buried beneath forests and dust, its gods replaced by new ones, and its history rewritten by the victors who survived. Yet somewhere in the echoes of old texts and forbidden libraries, whispers of the prince who couldn't feel pain refused to die. Travelers spoke of ruins high in the mountains where no birds sang, where the air itself carried a strange stillness. Those who ventured near claimed they felt watched. Some said they saw pale figures wandering through mist. Others swore they heard faint cries that were not born of agony, but of emptiness. Scholars dismissed these tales as superstition. But in the late 19th century, an expedition led by Dr. Aurelia Finch unearthed what remained of Verathane's lower citadel. Among shattered idols and corroded instruments, she found a sealed chamber, walls lined with surgical tools and scripture carved directly into bone. One inscription read, "Pain was the teacher. We silenced it. Now it will never stop teaching." Within the chamber lay a single figure, perfectly preserved, resting upon a slab of obsidian. The body was that of a young man, his features eerily serene, his flesh untouched by decay. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, like iron and rain. Dr. Finch's journal entries grew increasingly erratic after that discovery. The body does not rot. The veins shimmer under light. He seems to sleep, yet sometimes I swear his chest moves. My assistant cut her hand on one of the instruments. The next morning the wound had closed completely, but she felt nothing. Her final entry ended abruptly. "He dreams through us." The expedition vanished without a trace. When a second team arrived months later, the chamber was empty. The slab cracked, the inscription smeared with what looked like blood. In the years that followed, fragments of Verathane's creed began resurfacing in secret societies, orders devoted to purity through painlessness, performing rituals eerily reminiscent of the old experiments. Their leaders spoke of the silent heir, a figure who would return when mankind once again sought to overcome the limits of flesh. Historians argue that the legend of Cailan is metaphor, a cautionary tale of human ambition, a symbol of how science and faith can twist into cruelty when unchecked. Yet the few who have seen the relics tell another story. In one museum, an unmarked skull bears scars only a scalpel could make. In a private collection, a preserved hand shows no signs of decomposition, its fingers frozen mid-motion, as if reaching for something unseen. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the mountain that once held Verathane, there is said to be a sealed vault that hums faintly at night, as though something within it still remembers the sound of pain. They say the line of Verathane ended with Cailan, but legends insist otherwise, that the curse did not die, only evolved. Some claim a few rare souls are still born unable to feel pain, their lives shadowed by the same cold curiosity that once ruled a prince. Perhaps the true legacy of Cailan is not in the ruins or relics, but in humanity's endless desire to conquer its own nature, no matter the cost, because every age, in its arrogance, tries to build a world without suffering. And every age forgets pain was never the enemy. It was the last thing keeping us human. Beyond the known files, some stories aren't meant to be told, yet they refuse to stay buried. This has been another journey beyond the known files, where history's secrets meet the edge of the unknown. The tale of the prince who couldn't feel pain reminds us that even in the grandest empires, it is not war or famine that ends them first, but the quiet arrogance of those who believe they can master what makes us human. If this story made you question what lies beneath the surface of recorded history, the hidden chambers, the erased experiments, the kings and scholars who tried to play God, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every week we uncover another truth the world tried to forget. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the truth is never as far away as they want you to believe.